I've added a SVG and set its display to none because I'm actually going to be using this like a sprite sheet with SVG items inside that I can reuse. I don't want to put all of the SVG markup inside of each button. We use symbols for creating reusable icons. In this design, we need to ask ourselves a question. Are these icons going to be represented elsewhere in the application? And if that is true, then we probably want to go and create symbols for that in the HTML root file for the application and then just reuse it inside of the component. In this case, I'm assuming to say, okay, let's assume that this is a self-contained component. I'm still going to use the symbols here just because it makes it easier for us to manage the SVGs and to work with them, and it cleans up our code as well so that it's easier to maintain. So getting used to using the symbols is actually quite important. In our toolbar, we've gone and added an SVG and used the use element to say, please go and find me the symbol that has an ID called filter. So if you look at the symbol here, you'll see that the symbol has an ID called filter, and I've replicated the width and the height as it is in the SVG file itself. So if I go to this guy here, you can see the width and the height is 24 pixels. But I've copied the path information of that icon out and put it in here. Anyway, let's go and have a look at what this looks like. Coming to the browser, I can immediately see we have some problems. One, the icon looks a little bit big. We probably want to scale that down a little bit. When I use my selection tool, I can see, oh, this SVG size is actually kind of on an odd space, so we're going to have to scale that. And this toolbar's layout is problematic as well because I can't center line the items. So I want to go and change this toolbar to use flex. Now before I go and add a whole bunch of other stuff to this toolbar, let's just fix this one problem first. Let's go and get this toolbar to display flex. Let's go and make sure that this icon is sized appropriately and placed appropriately. And once we're actually happy with that, then we can start adding more content. So let's start with the toolbar, and we're going to say that your display is flex. Your flex direction is a row. We want to align all the items to the center as well, please. Going back to the browser and refreshing it, we can see, well, we have a problem. Our icon is way out here in La La Land, and that is because it is actually center aligning the SVG. If I go and select the SVG, I can see that it is in the middle of the toolbar. It's just too big. So let's go and test something quickly. Let's take our SVG here, and we'll say make your width equal to 24 pixels and your height is equal to 24 pixels. Now we can see, yes, actually this thing does fit in quite snug as we wanted, except it's really tight on the edge of the toolbar. So we want to go to the toolbar and just say, give me a padding 0 to the top. We probably want to have 0.5 rem on the right, 0 at the bottom, and 0.5 rem on the left. And now that starts looking a little bit closer to what we want. So we don't have to go through that whole 4 corners. We can also use a shortcut to say for the top and the bottom we want to use 0, and for the left and the right we want to use a padding of 0.5 on our toolbar. So that will ensure that everything works quite nicely. And we know that we have multiple icons on the screen that we want to affect. So let's create a class that we can use on our icons. Here I've just set it the size to 2424. We'll scale it up and down a little bit later just to sort of match a bit closer to the design. But for now, let us go to our SVG here and just say that the class is equal to icon, and let's go and see what this has done in the browser. Refreshing the browser, we can see that the icon is nicely aligned. It has that 24 by 24 size now, so when I hover over it, it's going to give me a nice sizing. Our toolbar is displaying as flex with the items aligned with a nice padding on it. We're actually ready now to start adding more content. Looking at the design, we can see that we have a couple of items we need to contend with. We have this icon, we have an input that affects the filter, we have this line here, which is how we're going to add that thing. Then we have a button with an icon in it and another button with an icon in it. So the first thing that we need to do is to actually go and add the SVG items that we require to the symbols and make sure that that is set up for us to use. Then let's go and have a look at the toolbar, and we can see that we have our filter icon followed up by the input that we're going to type our stuff into. And from a testability perspective, we probably want to be able to uniquely identify this item, so we're going to give it an ID so we can reference it. And then I've added a div here for the spacer for the line that's in there that we'll style to make it look like that. I didn't want to put it as part of the input or part of the button because I want to keep things nice and clean and neat, and have a form of separation between the things. So having the spacer there buys me that. Then I also have a button with an SVG in it. Again, it uses the class icon on it, and it uses the symbol for the list, and the same goes for the picture button, but it uses the photo symbol above. Looking at it in the browser, we can see there's our icon, our input. We can't see the div just yet. We can see our two buttons, and now we're ready to start styling. Before we make anything official, let's just go and play with this in the browser a little bit just to start getting an idea of what we want to do. So the first thing we want to do is actually just make these SVGs a little bit smaller. So if I go to this icon class here and I say, okay, well, take the scale for me and make it 0.8. Yeah, that looks a lot better already. And I want to push this stuff up to the side, and the way I can do that is to take this input and say I want to give you a flex of 1, which means take up all the remaining space basically. And I'm getting pretty close to the layout that I want. The only problem I'm still sitting with is with the spacer, so let's try and give that thing a width of say 5 pixels. Now we can still see that the height is 0, so we'll have to give that a height, and let's say your height is 100% just so that you take up the rest of the space. And now when I hover over this thing, I can see, okay, cool, I have my spacer there. Now that we've given it its appropriate dimensions, we can reuse that border we have. So we can say that your border on the right hand side is for border. And if we zoom in here a bit, you can see there is the border, and it looks quite nice, but we can probably still play with this a little bit, tweak it down to say 3 pixels. That'll give us the appropriate spacing that we want. And now the layout or the basics of this thing is looking pretty good. There's still some tweaks that we can do, but we have some idea of how we want to tackle this. So let's go and make this official. What I ended up doing is on the input setting the flex to 1, so that was good. On the icon, we kept the scale at 0.8. On the spacer, however, I made a couple of changes. I said, okay, well, let's make the spacer 1 pixel because the whole border is 1 pixel in any way. We're still giving it a height of 100. We're still giving it the border, but we're giving it a margin of 0.25 rem just to give it a bit of breathing space. Going to our browser, we can see, right, our layout is actually looking pretty close to what we want to do. Next up, we'll start styling the input.